Welcome to Brighter Futures, the show about how ideas improve lives and change policy. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dave Clark from the School of Life Sciences and the Institute for Analytics and Data Sciences. Expertise in quantitative and qualitative ecology, bioinformatics, modelling, in short, the whole picture of data sciences. So welcome, Dave, and perhaps you'd like to kind of start by saying a bit about this whole thing of data sciences and how important it is in the modern world to us all.
Yeah, sure, thanks very much. Data science is becoming a much bigger thing these days in not only academia but also industry as well. We've gotten very good at collecting all sorts of data about what we do and our activities and our research. And now we're really looking to make the most and get the most insight from that data. And so it's data science and modelling and statistics that's allowing us to do that. So it's becoming a really big element of all of our lives, actually, whether we realise it or not. So,
and this is kind of mostly hidden from contemporary view, isn't it? It's kinds of things that are happening a little bit in the background. But in terms of helping decision making, in the health sector, in conservation, in transport, almost every sector will have lots of information about it. And what are the sorts of things that you can do as a data scientist to help transform that data in a positive way?
Yeah, sure. So as you say, we're always collecting data. Everything we do leaves some sort of data imprint on the world. And so as a data scientist, what we're looking to do is harness all of that data in the broadest sense possible, make sure that we're only looking at good quality data. So there's lots of bad quality data floating around, data that doesn't quite reflect reality in some way. And then we're looking to sort of learn general things about the data. So what predictions can we make using the data? What relationships exist within the data? So, and then we can use those to make predictions about, what things you might put on your shopping list, for instance, or where you're going each day in the morning, or, how much fuel you put in your car, or how many species there are in habitat, all sorts of things.
So it pretty well touches every area. So let's come to the public engagement side of things. So you've been involved. This gives opportunities for wider involvement of people in the gathering of the very data that you mentioned, which may help us understand the world in a better way. So tell us a bit about the Essex BioBlitz project. This is an innovative citizen science project. Tell us a bit about your engagement with that and what it's telling us.
Yeah, so the Essex BioBlitz project is a citizen science project that we're running here at the University of Essex in partnership with the Essex Wildlife Trust. And the aim of the project really is to look at the impacts of global warming and climate change here in Essex. Typically when we think about climate warming and that sort of thing, we're thinking of glaciers melting and polar bears standing on the last bit of ice somewhere in the poles. But of course, climate warming and climate change is happening here and having effects here. So what we're specifically interested in is the changes in flower phenology that climate warming brings. So we know from global studies that plants are generally flowering earlier in the year because of the warmer winters and springs that most places are having. And so we're particularly interested in what's happening in Essex. And the reason is that Essex has a very unusual climate in the UK. We have relatively warm winters because of our coastal proximity. And we have very dry summers as well because we're far to the east. So in that respect, we can kind of think of Essex as being something like what other parts of the UK might be like in the future, which is what climate predictions are making. The citizen science element of it that we're really hoping people get involved with is that people can contribute images of wild plants in bloom via a free app called iNaturalist. And the idea is that we build up this enormous data set of images of many different plant species all across Essex. And we can use that to look at when particular species are flowering in the year. So when their peak flowering times are, the duration of which they're flowering, how many flowering peaks there are. And then we can compare that historically to data from many hundreds of years ago or decades ago to look at more recent warming. And we can also compare it spatially to see how flower phenology changes throughout the county, as you go from urban to rural environments or as you go from coastal to inland environments.
So the technical part is that people use the app, the iNaturalist app, and take pictures, and those are automatically posted to a central space that you can then look at and take the data, scrape the data, and put it into a analytical form. Is that's as easy as it is?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So the app collects all of the information we need. It identifies or guesses at the identity of the species you've photographed, so you don't need to know any botany. It logs the GPS from your phone, so we have the coordinates of where each record was taken. We have the timestamp of the image, so when that record was observed, and we can gather all of that data centrally, as you say, and then start to analyse it.
So the partner, as you said, is Essex Wildlife Trust. Tell us a little bit about how members of the trust, and indeed citizens of Essex more broadly, have engaged. What sorts of numbers are we talking about? We're now in year 2 of the project?
We are in year 2 of the project, yeah. So when we started the project last year, we set a target of 2,000 observations, and we had no real idea whether we were going to get anywhere near that or not, or whether anyone was going to take part. So it was all a bit of an unknown. And in the end, we collected, I think, just shy of 18,000 observations in the end. And I think there was something like 600 people contributed those observations. So that was a fantastic achievement. It gave us great confidence going into the second year. We kind of learned a lot about how to almost advertise the project, how to get people enthused and engaged with it. And so this year we've done even better. We've pretty much doubled the number of observations, I think. I think we're close to 36,000 this year, getting on towards the end of the project. And I think close to 1,000 people have contributed observations this year. So I think that highlights the power of a simple idea, so a simple way of contributing data, and also the fantastic marketing and engagement that the Essex Wildlife Trust bring to the project as well.
Fantastic. So almost certainly too early to draw any kind of conclusions from that, but what sorts of things are you seeing as you do the analysis? And the pace of change of climate crisis is super fast, faster than many of us kind of thought.
Yeah.
So it could be these things are happening more quickly, and every year is beginning to look like an unusual year. Super wet at one point, super dry at another, hot, cold autumns, whatever is happening, and plants are responding in strange ways, presumably.
Yeah, well, last year was a particularly unusual year. The first day of the BioBlitz last year, we had snow at the start of April, and then it turned into a record drought and record-breaking temperatures here in the east. So it was a very unusual year, but maybe not that unusual, as you say, going forwards. But what we observed last year was that actually many of our native plants that we might initially have worried about during the hot summer actually fared quite well, and there were things like yarrow and many other species that were flowering even during those peak heat waves. They were still managing to flower, so that gave us a little bit of optimism moving forward.
Very interesting. So any hopes for this to carry on for a long time? I mean, for example, the Cornell eBird project began as a small project and has become this, I was going to say global monster, but it's not exactly that, but extraordinary world-spanning citizen science project. This presumably has the potential to carry on going, gathering data and layering on different forms of understanding into how ecology is responding?
I certainly hope so, yeah. So in the short term, we're hoping to get to 5 years worth of Essex BioBlitz project data. And that gives us a good basis to start making these more historical comparisons. But in the long term, yeah, for sure, it'd be great to extend this into the future and really look at how modern climate warming is affecting things and how quickly plants are responding to some of the extreme weather conditions that we're experiencing. So, yeah.
So can you kind of speculate a bit about some of the policy implications of this? I mean, obviously there's a whole set of ones about trying to stop climate crisis. So fossil fuel use and so forth has got to end at some point. But in terms of the implications for the ecosystems and the ecology and the habitats of Essex, which the Wildlife Trust and its members, it's nearly 40,000 members, would be super interested in knowing what should we be doing as a result of the information that's coming forward?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it obviously very much depends on what we find in the long term, but I think there's obvious implications for how we manage our green spaces. So one of the things is that we can make a lot more of our green spaces and make them more biodiverse places to begin with, but then how we manage those green spaces, so how frequently we mow, for instance, fields and meadows, when we mow them is particularly important. So if plants are flowering earlier or later into the year, that's going to determine when they're going to seed, and so that should then inform us about when it's a good time to mow or not, and therefore, keep the plants seeding and keep the generations going for the next year. So I think there's obvious implications for how we manage green spaces and our habitats.
Very interesting. Well, let's kind of have a think perhaps a bit about kind of citizen science projects as a whole. What sorts of lessons are you picking up from this particular project? Can you draw some generic lessons about citizen engagement in scientific issues, which, as we said earlier, could span all sorts of different areas, from health to ecosystems to the state of the economy? You can imagine every kind of possible area. More data, well analysed, should lead to improvements in kind of understanding and policy. But just to start with, we've got to think about what is citizen science and how well it works.
Yeah, so I think obviously, like we said earlier, everything we do almost nowadays leaves some sort of data imprint on the world, and so whether we like it or not, we're almost always contributing citizen science data of one form or another that can be analysed. But I think what's really nice about the BioBlitz project in particular is that it actively involves people in the data collection process. So people know that they're contributing data to this project, they understand why they're contributing data, and as a result of contributing data, they're kind of learning something about the plants and the environment in which they live in, which I think is quite nice. So I think that's a nice lesson I've certainly learned, is that there's a real benefit to not only passively sort of scraping citizen science data, but actually actively involving people in the data collection process. I think works really well. So,
and in this case, that gathering of the information, especially as all we're doing is having a mobile phone in between us and the natural world, but it's telling you, you're going out and looking, and it's telling you what you're seeing. So that increase in knowledge is probably leading to an increase in care, and not just understanding, but a sense of how we should look after things better.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Yeah, I think it's a nice thing to, we all walk past hundreds of different species of plants on a daily basis that we probably don't look twice at, and suddenly if you can put a name to it and you can understand, oh, it's got a name, and so you can start to learn a little bit more about it, and you understand what are the features that make it that particular species, and you understand that, oh, it flowers at this particular time of year, and you start to notice it more, and you start to build up that little bit more understanding of the environment around you. And I think, hopefully that inevitably leads to you caring that a little bit more, and therefore looking after it a bit more.
So let's finish with a couple of quick thoughts on policy implications or big kind of recommendations that come from citizen science, from this kind of BioBlitz project, the engagement of people in gathering information for science. A couple of thoughts in addition?
Yeah, so I think obviously from a scientist point of view, make citizen science data simple to contribute. I think it has to be a really simple idea to get people to engage, and I think every time you ask people to do more and more, you're putting those barriers in there for engagement. So I think simple ideas work well. I think it's really important that we're really open about what the data is going to be used for, and we do our best to disseminate that to the people who are gathering this data. And I think in terms of policy implications, I think we need to make much more use of the citizen science data we have available. I mean, there are all sorts of databases that some of which we've talked about, that could be used for monitoring our environment and making better recommendations of how we should manage it. But it's massively an underused resource, so I think we should make far better use of that in informing policy changes and that sort of thing.
Fantastic. Dave Clark, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
For more conversations and ideas on how research and policy changes people's lives, pop across to our sister podcast, Louder Than Words.